So the fight for marriage equality making more headlines in New Hampshire, where there is a push now to repeal legislation that legalizes it. And in a strange twist, opponents of marriage equality now appear to be embracing civil unions. Joining me from New Hampshire is Craig Stoll, the Republican co-chair of Stand Up for New Hampshire Families. And in Philadelphia, Brian Brown, president of the National Organization for Marriage. Gentlemen, it's good to have you here. I want to start out with you, Craig. Tell us about the push that's taking place right now in New Hampshire, potentially to repeal this 2-year-old law giving marriage equality to New Hampshire residents.
Right. Right now as it stands, we have the freedom to marry in New Hampshire. As a former Marine and someone who served in Iraq, I tell you I don't take freedom lightly. For me, this is a very personal fight. I have a gay brother who happens to be my best friend, the godfather to my daughter. And when I got married, he was standing there right next to me as my best man. And I got to tell you, it was one of the greatest experiences of my life. And I want to be there for him when he has that very same experience.
The great thing about New Hampshire, the motto being live free or die, New Hampshireites really believe in that. Brian, the one thing that the National Organization of Marriage has not normally done has come out in support of civil unions. However, now the organization does support civil unions for the state of New Hampshire. Explain that switch.
Well, the reality is that this bill takes us back to the status quo before special interest groups from out of state put a lot of money into the New Hampshire legislature to redefine marriage. And so what this bill does is simply take us back to the status quo before, where you did have civil unions. And we support the legislature righting this great wrong. The people of New Hampshire did not want same-sex marriage. Again, this was bought and paid for by a lot of money, and the fact is that many of those legislators who voted for this are now out of office. The people voted in the ballot box and had a historic change there where the Republicans took over. 119 legislators were booted out, and they were booted out because they took it upon themselves to redefine marriage. This bill will allow the people to have a vote through a referendum and will right this great wrong that was put on New Hampshire, not coming from the people, but coming from out-of-state interest groups who, again, tried to buy and pay for same-sex marriage in New Hampshire.
Craig, how do you respond to that? Going back to the status quo. Right now, the status quo is that marriage equality is legal. How do you say to people in the state of New Hampshire who have been legally wed now since 2002, this needs to be reversed? What are the people of New Hampshire saying to this?
Well, I think it's kind of funny when somebody out of state sits here and tells me how I should live my life in New Hampshire. It really is an interesting thing. And I think that today you're going to see a real bipartisan push, Republicans and Democrats, that are on the side of freedom and liberty and understand that this is the live free or die state, and that what they're really voting on here is taking away rights from loving and committed couples.
Brian, for the National Organization of Marriage, because we've interviewed you before, I've interviewed you before, you aren't in favor of civil unions. So is this a white flag, a surrender in a certain aspect, realizing that the flow, the tides are changing, and that marriage equality is a reality? Right now it is a reality in 8 states and the District of Columbia.
Well, you refer to 8 states. 2 of those states will have a referenda coming up in November. We're going to have a national referendum on the same-sex marriage issue in November with 5 different states coming up for votes. And I expect in all those states, just as the 31 states, every single time a state has had the chance, they've rejected same-sex marriage. There is no right to redefine marriage. It doesn't expand liberty to give the state the prerogative to redefine something as basic and common sense as that it takes a man and a woman to make a marriage. That isn't about expanding liberty. That's giving the government the right to redefine something it doesn't have the right to redefine. So we're looking forward to the vote today. I expect we're going to have a majority here, and I think it's going to be historic to have a state vote and have a majority vote to say this was wrong. We made a tragic mistake 2 years ago, and we're going to right that wrong. And I expect that we're going to see a victory today. Again, Governor Lynch will likely override. We'll work to try and override. Governor Lynch will veto, and we'll work to try and override that veto. But regardless of what happens, to have a majority vote to set things right will be a great victory for those of us who know that marriage is the union of one man and one woman.
Brian, is it sometimes just exhausting for you and what the National Organization of Marriage does to try to stand against the tide of equality? Is it exhausting?
Well, again, I see the tide moving in the direction of protecting marriage. When you've had 31
marriage is already protected.
Votes,
I don't see anybody from New Hampshire coming on here saying over the past 2 years that their marriage broke up because marriage equality became legal in the state of New Hampshire. How has marriage for New Hampshireites been interfered with since the fact that marriage equality has become legal for all residents there?
Well, when you redefine marriage, you redefine it for everyone. You don't just redefine it for that couple. You change what's taught in the public schools, and there are plenty of people in New Hampshire. You can get Representative Bates or the folks from Cornerstone to come on and talk about the very real effects of redefining marriage. It changes what's taught in the schools. We've seen religious organizations attempt to coerce them, shutting down Catholic Charities Adoption Agency in Boston because it cannot, according to its religious beliefs, place children with same-sex couples. These are fundamental constitutional questions, and redefining marriage is not an expansion of liberty. In fact, it's a direct attack on the First Amendment.
Brian, I saw the movie Bully last night. I recommend you look at it. New Hampshire Stand Up for New Hampshire Families co-chair Craig Stoll, Brian Brown from the National Organization for Marriage. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me today. We'll keep our eyes on what happens in New Hampshire.